And I think like the investment we're really talking about here is time and
Right.
energy.
Yes.
I think in reality with digital marketing, there's this illusion that's created that everything happens really fast because things change really quickly. And that's just not true. It's a major myth. Like, you have to stick with things to see if they work. Does it mean you can't make tweaks after a couple of weeks or learn quickly? Absolutely not. But just like when SEO was first the big thing everyone was discussing, like, you're not going to see meaningful SEO results in under probably 6 months. And that's being a little bit generous if you're talking about a major strategy.
Exactly.
And that's true of anything. Like, of course, things can go viral. There are companies that really hit the nail on the head, but 9 times out of 10, it's because they were doing the wrong thing, leading them to the right thing, which kicked off really quickly.
Most companies are using some form of digital marketing these days. However, a growing number are struggling to achieve the results they hoped for. What used to be a handful of digital options has now mushroomed into a vast array of choices and complex media plays. Those early days of banner adverts, sponsored content, and posts on a few social media platforms have morphed into a situation where companies are struggling to keep up with a massively time-consuming frenzy of online activities, often without having a clear idea of what's working or how they should be benchmarking success. I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. Each week, I sit down with industry leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and authors who share their expertise, experience, and insights so that we can identify steps that lead to greater success. To gain some clarity on digital marketing, I reached out to Madeline Farquharson, marketing lead at Inqling, a digital media consultancy that helps small companies tell their story and connect with their audience. Her team are masters at designing those moments of engagement that customers have with companies online. In this episode, Madeline is going to share some huge insights, including why marketers need a provisional persona for their products, the power of community in driving leads, how we can benchmark the success of our digital marketing, why it actually pays to use paid promotion, and the critical difference between rented and owned audiences. Before we get started, if you're looking to develop knitwear collections that customers will crave, then Spin Expo is the place to go. It's the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair is a rich resource, featuring well-edited, high-quality collections, as well as cutting-edge technical innovation, not to mention outstanding trend information that cannot be found anywhere else. You can learn more at spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. There's also a link in the show notes. And check out our website. You can find all of the previous episodes of A Seat at the Table, the show notes, productivity tips, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's SEAT.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Now, we have a lot to unpack with Madeline, so let's get right into it. Madeline, I am really, really thrilled to have you on A Seat at the Table because I think that right now everybody is really struggling to understand how to do digital marketing. We were thrown into it during the pandemic, even people who were used to doing offline marketing, right? How to somehow figure out how to survive online. And then at the same time, everybody else wanted to just see, well, how do we up our game, right? Because we know that this is really the way forward, or at least a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been definitely a super crazy year. And I'm really grateful to be here having this discussion with you because I really strongly believe that the best strategies and tactics come out of conversations. There is no like one size fits all. And so I think one of the things that's been really interesting about the pandemic is that a lot of these events that people used to go to in order to discuss strategies and tactics or network with other people or understand what they should be doing next either disappeared completely or they became virtual events, which are a completely different dynamic, of course. And so I'm happy to be here as well, just because I think these conversations are so fruitful in learning and growing and developing and keeping on top of all of the new trends in marketing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head with all of the new trends because I have really spent a big part of this pandemic trying to double down on understanding best practices in digital marketing, because I came from a world where everything was offline. You'd go to people's offices, you'd make presentations, we would do live events. Digital was really just sending emails to people or things like that, right? And now it was a matter of learning not only what are the tactics, but what actually works, because as you know, it can be a humongous time-consuming situation to be doing so many of these online marketing campaigns and not knowing what you really should be doing, right? So somebody says you should be all over social media. So you're all over social media and then you're not getting any results. So and then somebody else says, no, you should be doing webinars. You should be doing something else. And then, oh, you're on the wrong social media. So it's crazy. How do you sift and sort amongst all these different opportunities, so to speak?
Oh, it's a really great question. I know everybody says that on a podcast, like, oh, this is such a good question, but truly it is a good question. And I think it's the question, to be honest, right. Like, where do I go next? Where do I start? What do I do? And no matter whether you're in B2B, B2C, whether you're selling a product, whether it's a physical product, a digital product, anything, and honestly, whether it's online or offline marketing, it all starts with who your end user, customer, client, et cetera is. If you don't have an incredibly intimate knowledge of that person, what they want, what they're driven by, what are their jobs to be done, how you can provide value for them, then you're never going to be able to answer that question of what do I do? Because to be honest, when people write these templates on this is why you should be on LinkedIn, or this is how to gain followers on Instagram, or throw your old strategy out the door, like here's how to do social media, or here's how to do like webinars or events, or here's the next blah, blah, blah. You always have to validate it for yourself and your own company and your own goals and your own audience. And if, for example, you're working with an end customer who doesn't learn digitally, they're not used to learning in digital courses, and you're building them a digital course because your marketing article of the week says you should be putting all of this knowledge into a course that's like a free lead generator, you're never going to end up with the right audience. Or what's going to happen is either you're going to build an audience of people who are incredibly wrong for your product, or you're going to build an audience of people who aren't going to do what you want them to do in the end. And so I think the real answer to the question starts and ends with who is your audience? Who are you selling to? What do you want them to do? And working backwards from there, how can you provide that person value? And how can you build a relationship with them? Because at the end of the day, things change, trends change, they're digital, they're offline, they're whatever, but it's all relationship management. And the way that relationship looks online digitally might be a bit different than how it looked when you could physically shake someone's hand in an office. But it is still a relationship that you're cultivating and growing at the end of the day.
I think that's so important. And there's so much to unpack around that, because the initial sort of outlook on social media in particular was more is more. Everybody wanted more followers, more likes,
so true.
more people who would come over to their website, right? So they'd have more traffic. And like you're saying, it's not really about more, because you end up entertaining lots of people. But are those people who would realistically ever end up converting to being users of your products? And oftentimes it's no. And then people are disappointed. So, what might be a roadmap for determining key things about your customers that you need to know?
This is a good one. I know. And this is the thing is I find that everybody wants like roadmaps, templates. We always look out there, and when we're trying to figure out, because there's nothing more painful than growth in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously there are more painful things in the business, but if you're a marketer, you're in growth, or even if you're a founder or CEO or someone who's kind of a small business owner who's kind of wearing many hats, if you don't have a natural inclination toward growth and marketing, it can be incredibly painful. So we do want these roadmaps. And I think starting from what your audience wants is always start from your provisional persona. And what a provisional persona is it basically asks for your client or your customer or your user, what are their behaviors? What are their needs? What are their goals? And what are their pain points? And then when you map that against your product, you look at, okay, how for that person, that dream person. And when we talk about a provisional persona, it's not necessarily always data proven in the beginning. Sometimes it's just, if I could create the perfect human for my business, who would it be?
Right.
And then you go out and see if that person exists. And you might come with a rude awakening that person doesn't exist. But along the way, you might pivot and turn to accommodate a market size that actually can have the growth you want it to be. But it's all relative depending on your business this. But when you look at that provisional persona, the response to it is your product. And that's a very important distinction, which is that your product should not be created first and then you shoehorn in a customer. You find your perfect provisional persona and then you answer their questions with your product. That's the flow of the conversation. And in that way, your product becomes more of, if they have jobs to be done, here's the way we answer those jobs to be done and provide a response to those needs. Here's pain relievers. Here are gain creators. Here are the things we do to help that person do what they need to do. And when you go through this process of figuring out your provisional persona and then understanding how your product fits into that story, it becomes easier to understand where that person might live, how you want to respond to them. Like if their number one pain point, for example, is, oh goodness, I don't even like, let's say their number one pain point is that one of my clients is in smartphone habits. If they spend too much time on their phone and their families like comment on it, then one of your main gain creators should be to get them off their phone, or pain relievers to help them so that they can actually go and spend time with their family. And right there, bam, you've got marketing messaging. Go spend more time with the people you love. So it all ends up flowing if you start from the user.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is that you want to start from the bottom up, as opposed to what typically people do, which is top down. And I think that's a point that I think all of us are guilty of overlooking. Me too. And that is that you get this really great product idea, and like you said, you try to sort of mold the audience to fit the product, as opposed to finding out what do people really want, because sometimes what they want, you're like, oh, that isn't what I wanted to create. That's what
absolutely. And I think this is actually a really great point. And to pivot a little, is that real strong digital marketing comes from strong, well-intended products. I mean, that's where it begins. And a lot of people will say, like, do you want to have great marketing? Have a great product. A great product markets itself. And while I think there are limitations to this statement, it's really true. Like, you can hire a team of 100 strong marketers, and if your product doesn't solve a real problem, those 100 team marketers are going to be earning their paychecks without really delivering what you want them to deliver. And to be honest, whose fault is it then? Is it your marketers who are being sent on a wild goose chase? Or is it, your fault or the product owner's fault for not actually listening to the real needs? Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think that's a huge obstacle that people face. And I think that, even if you're well-intended, it's not easy to get that kind of feedback. And that's half the battle. I know we try to do that too with our products, is say to people, we'd love to talk to you. Could we come around to your office? Could we jump on a Zoom call? It's hard to get people to raise their hand because they're busy with other stuff. And then when you actually do get to see them, they haven't really focused on your product, right? They're worried about their product. So it's really difficult to get that. And I think people don't realize how much effort you have to put in to get that. But if you can get it, it's gold, like you're saying. What have you found as ways that people can be more successful in getting that feedback? We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, this is always really tricky, obviously, because there's different types of feedback you can get, and these different types of feedback should be weighed differently. I know that sounds like a really vague and jumbled sentence, but what I mean is that if you have a product that you're trying to understand more about and you speak to someone about the product, and it's kind of like would you buy this? Like, let's say you're working in HR tech and you're trying to sell your HR tech to HR decision makers. And so you get a HR decision maker on the phone and you show them your, portal or whatever it is that you're selling. And they say, oh, this solves so many problems. That's great. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. And you have this great conversation. Awesome. But for a lot of people, it's not necessarily that easy to get direct feedback. And it might be that the product is more nuanced, that it involves internal triggers a lot more, especially in the B2C space. I find that when you're building like an app or a service or subscription that relies on a person's internal triggers to come back time and time again, or to refer to people or whatever, you can't always listen to what's coming out of their mouths because it's not necessarily going to be the strongest type of information. So that's kind of answering it backwards, is if the strongest type of information is the type of information in which, for some B2C projects, those internal triggers become revealed themselves, then it can be as simple as sending out a prototype to a couple of people, paying like a little bit of money for them to like click through it. And then they click through it and they show you the behavior that you want to see. It could also be actually interviewing people. And I actually find that businesses, people, users, clients, customers, you can find people who are legitimately interested in having a conversation with you. But like anything, you have to help them understand what's in it for them, right? Are they going to be an early adopter? Are they going to get like a special once you have your product released to the public? You know, can you just flatter them? Sometimes just plain flattery works. And so if you go and you can use your personal networks like LinkedIn, this is where building up your own personal brand or social networks can be really valuable. You could also just do cold outreach like you would if you were building your client base as a freelancer, where you just say, hey, I know you're in this space. Would you speak to me? And I do think it's really difficult because it's a very labor intensive process to go out there and try and search for people. One recommendation I have is that if you're a small business owner or a solopreneur, let's say you don't have a lot of resources, find a virtual assistant for really cheap. You can get them for not a lot of money and have them help you do this type of outreach. Create channels that have regular feeders. And I guess the number one piece of advice I can get around like, okay, how do you find these people is if you don't feed in the process, like if you're looking in the moment you need it, you've already looked too late. So always feed a system where you have customers or potential customers in your calendar, even if you have no idea what you're going to talk to them about yet. Always have those meetings in your calendar because you will always use them for something, 100% guaranteed. So so creating those feeder processes, you can hire a virtual assistant, you can hire, or you can do it internally. Cold outreach works, putting out surveys, just messaging some people on LinkedIn, not in an annoying way, but using your own personal network can be helpful. And just letting people know you have this really cool new thing that you'd like them to test. Like the internal ego allows people to get involved in ways that you might not think.
I think that's a really good point. And we overlook that oftentimes, and part of it is just because for most companies, they don't really have a dedicated department that's just handling this. I mean, huge companies do, but for a lot of your mid-sized companies, they don't. And so therefore there's, they're trying to, on the one hand, learn, on the other hand, execute, right? Sort of like me with the manual on my lap, trying to read as I go too much of the time, trying to learn this new thing and see what's going on with it and test it. And it's a lot to sort out. But I think you make some very good points about the fact that you sort of have to sharpen your axe in advance and have things in place and make this, as you say, systematized, even if you're only doing it once a quarter, right? But at least you have it in place that once a quarter we're going to do this, and we have it as part of, sort of like you said, a process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, when you're looking at digital marketing, and that really covers so many different things, right? Everything from classic banner ads to sponsored content, right, to social media. What are you seeing at the moment that's gaining traction, that's working for clients? Do you see anything that looks like it's trending well at the moment?
This is interesting because I think, again, just to echo myself from earlier, it really depends on your audience. Okay. For some people, for some clients, I see social media marketing working really well. And this could be traditional social media marketing. And when I say traditional, I mean like the usual suspects, right? Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. But there's also Reddit, Quora, all sorts of other platforms that can be incredibly significant. But I think the overarching thing that's really mind is that there's different types of growth. So there's marketing-led growth, there's product-led growth, there's community-led growth, there's customer-led growth, there's all sorts of different types of growth. And I think one of the underdogs that's really come blazing forward is community-led growth. And the reason why I think it's been underdog historically is because what is community? When we ask people like, oh, what does community mean? You can get 70 different answers from 70 different marketers or community leaders, whatever.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of community-led growth because it's not just about creating an audience, but about engaging that audience. And a lot of times when we're doing digital marketing, we think about, the top of funnel is this like huge mass group of people that you get into the concert hall. Right. And then you hope by the middle of the funnel that some of those people stick around for the main event. And then that by the end of the funnel, some of them like buy the merchandise on the way out because they like the band so much.
Yeah.
But with community-led growth, like the way a lot of them think about it is like, yeah, you have this whole room of like people, but when they're still in that top of funnel space, get them to talk to each other, get them to get something out of the experience that isn't just the event that's on stage, but like that will also make them grateful for the main event for bringing them there and engaging with each other and carrying forward these like values and mission and whatever. And community-led growth can look like a lot of things. It can look like creating Slack channels or like actual forum-based communities and discussion-based communities. But it can also look like events and webinars and opportunities for people to talk to each other that might not otherwise be able to talk to each other. And networking opportunities. And just these types of initiatives, I think, are incredibly powerful because if the pandemic has proven anything, it's that we feel incredibly disconnected despite the tools we have for connection. So anything your brand or your company or your product, I mean, even better if you can move some of this community stuff into your product itself so that people like need to get in there in order to get engaged in your community. But anything you can do to bring people together, and that becomes a great growth lever. And then word of mouth just goes nuts. So I would definitely recommend investing in community-led growth if it's something that your team is bringing up to you or you've been thinking about dabbling with. It's a great investment.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've been hearing that word community coming up an awful lot recently. So you've really touched on something. But I think that the challenge is that on the one hand, community, like you said, can be very, very powerful and very engaging. And yet on the other side of it, it's not easy to get that going, right? It's like this huge flywheel that's starting to get people in there and talking that's like a long runway that you need in order to get that momentum going. But like you said, if you're able to do that, it can be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the investment we're really talking about here is time and energy.
Yes.
I think in reality with digital marketing, there's this illusion that's created that everything happens really fast because things change really quickly. And that's just not true. It's a major myth. Like you have to stick with things to see if they work. Does it mean you can't make tweaks after a couple of weeks or learn quickly? Absolutely not. But just like when SEO was first the big thing everyone was discussing, like you're not going to see meaningful SEO results in under probably 6 months. And that's being a little bit generous if you're talking about a major strategy.
Exactly.
And that's true of anything. Like, of course, things can go viral. There are companies that really hit the nail on the head, but 9 times out of 10, it's because they were doing the wrong thing, leading them to the right thing, which kicked off really quickly.
Wow. I'm so glad you said that because I have so many conversations with clients of ours as well as with other people about this whole concept and that it just seems to be that success in the digital space in particular is really a function, right, of consistency with time as an element. And I kept thinking about how do we write that as a mathematical formula, right? And I haven't figured it out because I'm not that good with math. But in my mind, I see it as that kind of a thing. That is that consistency, like you said, over time. And then you tweak it as you go along. You experiment with things.
Absolutely.
And the time element just seems to disappear in most conversations. Like you said, people want those instant results and they get frustrated when they don't get them. So,
yeah, absolutely.
In your experience, how do you set out for your clients benchmarks? Because after all, I mean, someone might come to you and say, I'm willing to put in the consistency. I'm willing to put in the time. I also need to know if I'm on the right track, right? I don't want to be going down the wrong track forever. So how do you balance that out?
Yeah. So I generally work in B2C, like early stage startups, which is a
Right.
very delicate space to be working in
Yeah.
because everything is new.
True.
And
True.
you could be wrong with the product, not only with the marketing and the growth, but you kind of need to be moving forward in all directions all at the same time. And this idea of benchmarks and KPIs and metrics, they always come up. We always want to know, what's the magic number I have to hit to know things are working, or what's the magic number especially with my clients, what's the magic number I need to hit in order to be able to pitch my idea and get funded? Like where do I need to get? And again, it's completely different for every single company, but I think rather than setting metric or numerical based benchmarks, I like to think of it as like an overall experimentation process. And this is actually a word that's come up several times in this conversation, is experimenting with things. You just tweak and you experiment. And experimentation in business is a legitimate process.
Right.
Meaning that some of the strongest companies that work with growth legitimately run experiments. And I mean, they create hypotheses and tests, and then they look at their data and then they keep going. Like, that's how they're building their growth strategy. And so depending on where you're at, if you're in this like murky stage, some of your original benchmarks might be about your learnings, not necessarily about, I'm going to get you 100 new leads, or 1,000 new leads, or it's all relative depending on your product, but rather, I'm going to get you blueprints on what works. And in the beginning, it might look like low volume, but high conversion.
Right.
And then as we scale that room, it's going to look like higher volume and maybe medium or lower conversion, but we at least know that tactic works. And so the way I think of it is a framework of moving from ideation and concepting in your growth strategy into blueprinting. And this is where you're doing your experiments. So you're testing and seeing if social media is going to work for you. And if social media works, what channels, where are your clients living? Where do they go for their information and their value? What value can you provide? Do they like to refer to other people? How do they refer to other people? Then once you have these blueprints, and I use the word blueprint because they should be like sketches. They're not made in stone yet.
Right.
Then
right.
you move into your templatizing phase. And in your templatizing phase, this is where you're actually starting to lock things in. Like, when we do this, this happens. So that's kind of a template for us. We do this, this happens. There are a couple of iterations of how to do that. We've been able to repeat it a couple of times. And this is kind of the structure of how we do things, which then leads you into your final stage, which is scaling. So when you're scaling, it might be that when we put an ad about this topic, we get this many leads and this much conversion. That's really good for us. So we're going to pour more money into the ads, which is your scaling phase, and see what happens next. And different initiatives can go through this process at different times. There could be something that's starting just at the concepting phase and something that's already through to your scaling phase. And that's your foundation of how you get things going. But the idea is that your mindset, even when you're really successful, should always be an experimentation of, how can I mess around with this? And I think when I communicate to my clients, I always communicate in a way that speaks to growth mindset within growth, the growth mindset, so to speak. And it's not that metrics aren't important. It's just that as this process goes on, the metrics become obvious because you know your conversion rates after you've done a little bit of experimentation. You try and tweak those. Oh, there's like a 11% conversion rate from LinkedIn. Let's see if we could get that to 15%. Or, oh, this is only actually like 1% from install to paid subscriber. Can we get that up to 3%? Like, that would be amazing.
Right.
And that's when you get into the more tinkering phase. But I would say, like, the idea that you just kind of step in and you're like, I'm going to start social media marketing. We're going to start a Instagram and I want 5,000 followers. Like, that's so arbitrary.
Right.
Measure things that matter.
Yeah, that's very true. You know, it just reminds me of a quote, or it's more than a quote, from Seth Godin, and who says that just because you can measure it doesn't mean you should measure it. And he was talking about the digital space and the fact that you can measure absolutely everything, but everything doesn't actually matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things I wanted to mention is that with time and consistency and metrics and all of these things, because the reason why we turn to these is that we want to know that we're running in the right direction. Because when we're running toward ambiguity, it's really stressful to not know that there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel somewhere.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
In anything in life, we want to know there's an end date to the confusion and that clarity is on its way. But if you've determined that your audience is on LinkedIn, And
Right.
2 weeks goes by and you're not seeing traction. And 4 weeks goes by and you're seeing a little traction, but not enough. And you stop there. And then you look back at your provisional persona, which you've worked so hard on. There's a reason why you thought that your audience was on LinkedIn. So you could be completely wrong, but chances are you're just not giving it enough time, or not putting the right content out, or not having the right conversations. And I think people jump to completely cutting it off much faster than they jump to trying a new thing and tweaking a little thing. And that frustrates me, because I'm like, you chose that channel for a reason. You
Right.
wanted to experiment with webinars for a reason, or you decided SEO was important to you for a reason, whether it's on competitor research or user research or whatever. So just because it's not giving you that immediate gratification or the dopamine of working right away doesn't mean you should quit. It just means you might need to make some adjustments, but your audience is your audience. So, I mean, don't blindly like steer forward if you're wrong, but don't always jump to the conclusion that you need to stop and start something out of novelty's sake.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, because we tend to do that. Me too. You're doing one thing and you're not getting what you think is the right amount of traction, which is, of course, overnight results. And then somebody else mentions, oh, they're doing this, or you read about someone who's doing that. And so then you go running over. You're on LinkedIn, you run over to Instagram. Then you're not getting anywhere with Instagram, so you're thinking to yourself, oh, I got to be on Facebook. Or no. Somebody says, it's TikTok. You've got to be on TikTok. And so then you try to do that, but you never, like you said, you're never any place long enough to actually gain ground. And I think that, people don't really know what the timeline is. So from your experience, and I realize, as you've said earlier, that timeline can be very different for different clients and different products. But typically, when you're working on something, what do you think is, ballpark? What do you think is fair?
Yeah, so it depends on the channel. Some channels are harder to break into than others. Like, I mean, TikTok's a great example. There are some people who struggle with TikTok and try with TikTok and never really gain traction. And there are some people who upload like a TikTok video and go viral overnight. Wow. And are amazing, live happily ever after. I mean, it happens. What it comes down to is how strong your content is. So, I mean, why wouldn't, regardless of the channel, if you did your research and you understood what people wanted to hear about and you provided valuable information in a format that resonated with them and you put it out on any channel, I would be shocked if you didn't actually get some traction. But that's like a, journalist PR mindset, in addition to just being really like great with content. I mean, it's very hard to strike the chord every time. And I think the reality is that most of us, especially if we're solopreneurs, are not necessarily content gurus or specialists or whatever. We know what our clients want to hear. We know how to have the conversation. We might not know how to do it in video or whatever, or keep up with all the trends. And so I think the real question is, like, if you're working with minimal resources, moderate experience, but high understanding of your audience, how long do you stick with a channel before you kind of give up and move on to something else? And I would say it's less about quantity of time and more about leading indicators of success. So if you've gone like 1 month or 6 weeks and you're not seeing any meaningful change whatsoever, maybe that's around the time that you start to say to yourself, either I need to change what I'm doing, whether it's instead of putting out like LinkedIn text posts, I'm going to do videos and like completely dramatically change your content. Or you might want to think about exploring other channels. But if you're starting to see minor change, even if it's not to scale, even if it's going from 0 conversions to 3 conversions in 1 week, to 4 conversions in the next week, to if right. You are seeing growth, like try and stick with it and try and tweak from there. Worst case scenario, I think one of the other things is that you can probably find a couple of people who have not, like, who decided no for you or who didn't convert. Or if you're in a like, let's say you run a webinar and you collect some emails from the webinar and then you got 0 conversions how you wanted to after that webinar. You also can talk to people and say like, hey, what were you expecting in this? Why didn't you sign up for that? I'm just curious to know, blah, blah, blah. And then that might also tell you like, yeah, this is a great channel for getting people to engage with you on a community basis. But actually by running that specific topic, you're attracting the wrong type of person. So the webinar might work, but the topic might not work. And so asking these questions of people, speaking to other people in your industry is also super significant. But yeah, again, I think it's less about the time that passes and more about the change over time. And then at the end of the day, you might find that, let's say 2 months goes on and you're seeing steady growth, but it's still extremely small. You might know that that channel does technically work for you, but it's not worth the energy that you have to put into it. And TikTok's another great example of this. You can get like hundreds of thousands of views, millions of views even. None of them might convert, and video might be really uncomfortable for you, or you don't like it, and it might not be worth it. Yeah, okay, you get all those eyeballs, maybe a couple of them convert, but at the end of the day, if you're a solopreneur or you have a small team and you don't have the means to hire the like expertise you need, and you kind of only have limited scope of resources for yourself, then part of that decision is also finding the lowest hanging fruit for you too, because you need to be consistent and sustainable over time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that the other thing that I think people look at, they look at social media as being free. And people just think, well, that's what we should do, is free. And then, of course, if you've ever done it, unless you feel your time is worth nothing, you realize that it is a massive amount of time that you need to do, even if you're doing something quite simple, right? It just, the time flies when you're trying to get going on social media. So from that point of view, what would be the benefits of doing some kind of a paid promotion, whether it be banner ads or some kind of anything else that's paid, where you simply say, let me just pay and get this done, as opposed to having to constantly create these posts and put them up there and try to see how I can get that kind of engagement. What's your take on that?
This is really interesting because it reminds me of this model called the hub and spoke model.
Right.
And basically the idea is for anyone who doesn't know, if you find hubs are people who have, let's say, an audience of people you want to talk to. Those are the spokes, right? And so one of the mechanisms of growth is to find hubs that can speak to the spokes you want to speak to. Often translates to like influencer marketing, because that's how we think of it, right? That some influencers have audiences of people that would be attracted to our product. Therefore, we put our product in the hands of the influencer, and the influencer then distributes our product to the spokes of people. And I think, influencer or not, you can apply this to anything. If someone or something else already has your captivated audience, then leverage that. You don't have to create the wheel. You don't have to create a bespoke audience. Like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Like,
right.
It's often so much more energy. And so when you talk about banners, right? If there's a website, that is getting consistent traffic of people who would use your product or service and it would resonate with them, my God, invest in that. I mean, invest small in the beginning, always ask the right questions. Like, if they run banner ads, they'll have stats on what types of businesses are successful, what their usual click-through rates and conversion rates are. Of course, like, ask all the right questions before you invest. But whether it's organic or paid, never underestimate the power of leveraging someone else's audience, especially if it's through someone else that they trust. And this is why influencer marketing has become so popular and will probably continue to be popular as long as it remains trustworthy, because the idea now is that you can't tell what's fake or real coming out of an influencer's mouth. But absolutely, I believe so completely in hacking around. And you don't have to have thousands or millions or whatever of followers on any platform. You can 100% leverage the audiences of other people. I mean, some businesses are entirely built on the idea that you'll leverage their audience. So be clever about your marketing. Always cut corners. Like, it's the work smart, not hard, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that once you get into the digital world, it was built on free, because having things free built those big user bases, right, for all the social media platforms and for many other things that were, sort of adjuncts to that. But it gave people that misunderstanding that we're starting to learn, is that nothing in life is really free. So yes, if you can leverage somebody else's work, I think we overlook that.
And when we talk about like audiences, how to build audiences, what types of audiences do we put a little money behind? There's kind of two things that are echoing here. One is the idea of what you outsource versus what you do yourself. And the other idea is what type of audience you build and what type of audience you like take advantage of elsewhere. And when we think about outsourcing, sometimes we think about it, especially in solopreneur world or in any business, we'll think of things like outsourcing accounting or outsourcing entire sections of the business. But it can also be more micro than that. You could say like, I really hate writing content, or I really don't want to do this particular thing. And so you find a person who does that thing really well, even if you're willing to do all the other mechanics of it, writing the briefs, finding the research, whatever, never be afraid of not just putting money behind an ad or a banner, but putting money behind skills.
Yes.
You can outsource part of the problem as well. And that can help you scale massively. And I think the other thing about audiences that I wanted to make a point about is that when you think about the audience that you're building for yourself, there's rented audience and there's owned audience. Your rented audience is like social media. And when it's rented, it basically means there's someone between you and the people. And it may feel on social media that there's no one between you and the people, but let's say you're building a Instagram account for your business that wants to take people away from Instagram. Facebook can shut you down. Right, they can shut you down in a heartbeat. There are legitimate stories of, you hear about Apple and the App Store monopolization, and, Instagram will shut accounts down. Like this happens all the time. So if you put all of your like pennies in the bucket of social media, of a rented audience, that might work out fine for you, but it also can be very dangerous, which is why you want to think also about owned audience, which is things like newsletters, things like podcasts like this one. It's when you're speaking directly and there's no one in between you. There's no filter in between. And then of course there's monetized audiences, which is people who actually pay for your services and subscribe or whatnot. And I think when you're thinking about where to spend money, where to spend time and energy and resources, definitely take into consideration how risky it is to put all of your weight in one bucket or in multiple buckets, or what that would mean. And in some cases, it might be better to focus on your owned audience and use paid tactics for paid social media ads, or focus your energy on more viral tactics and pay and outsource for long-term tactics. But definitely look at the whole picture and constantly ask yourself, how could I outsource this? Is it worth outsourcing? What is the impact effort matrix that I can put this on, and make decisions accordingly?
I think that's such a great point. I think that we've become so seduced by all the things that we can do for allegedly free that we forget what happens when the train jumps the track. And, we all know of people who've had Facebook accounts shut down, right, or Instagram or whatnot, right, and they don't even know why. People are saying, I don't even know why. Like, why did they shut me down? You know what I mean? I'm not doing anything that's incendiary. It's devastating because suddenly they're out of business and they don't even know what happened.
Yeah.
So you're right. You have to have those plan B, if nothing else, right? You have to have other things that you're doing so that you don't completely go from high visibility to no visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another trick here is that you can also move people from rented to owned. So let's say you do decide that you want to move forward with doing a banner ad. It might behoove you to send people directly to a purchasing of a product, right? That might be the best conversion for you. But in some cases, you can use paid tactics as lead generators. And sometimes it sounds silly to us that we would pay to get, pay to keep it at such high parts of the funnel or the flywheel, right? And we're like, no, we want it to go right to actual purchase. But sometimes it does pay in the long term to use paid tactics to get people into your owned audience. Right. So if you do have a newsletter or a podcast, even if that's not where they end up in the end, think about putting some money behind bolstering that audience, because it gets people into your circle where you have their attention in a much different way than you have for your rented audience. So you can also think about funneling people toward different conversions than you normally would if you were just thinking, how do I get them to the money stage?
Yeah, I think that's really something important that we don't think about, because like you say, if you're a business, you're looking to actually grow sales, right? So sales wants to grow sales. Marketing is supposed to help you grow those sales. So everybody's looking at just how do we get to sales? And they're overlooking, like you said, how do we create this whole machine that ultimately will lead to sale. But that long term, it might take a little bit longer, but that will give us more stability in terms of having a steadier flow of leads, as opposed to maybe a short-term win that suddenly could jump the track.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also completely depends on the resources in the team that you have, if it's just you, if it's a small group of people. But then again, like if you have a rock star salesperson or customer success person who is just so good at closing the deal, then maybe your marketing team just needs to be getting them names and people and emails and people who want to speak to them, because they're so personable and they're so good at that part of the relationship or the email flow. Like, let's say you have a great CRM person that focuses so much on awesome email flows. Leverage the skills that you have available to you. Test things that are out of the box and just try not to get stuck in the usual traps of, I want them at the end of the day to download this app and pay for the subscription, or I want them to buy this product, or I want them to sign up for this thing and pay for this thing. You'll get them there. But again, back to the community thing, like it's all about the relationship development. And if you have every single part of your machine focusing on solving real user problems or real customer issues and pain points, then it's just a matter of time. And I think one of the other things that people often forget is that there will always be some people in your funnel or your flywheel or whatever, however you want to phrase it, that won't ever buy anything from you.
Right.
You catch them, they come. It's what happens. But if you're constantly focused on doing the right thing by your customer, going for the bottom up approach, always, 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 even in B2B, especially in B2B, if you're selling HR tech and your focus is building a product that will please the HR manager, but is ineffective for the end user, ridiculous. Ridiculous. But it's what we do because we focus on the wrong thing. And so I think, like, coming full circle to the beginning of the conversation, if you know that provisional persona, then you start testing it, then you start validating it, you really understand how your product solves problems, you really understand how your content gets value out there to the type of people you want to attract, you're going into channels that you know that person lives and exists, you are spending the time and consistency it takes to build a relationship with those people, results will come. There's just no way they won't. And if you think about it like a personal relationship, if you met someone random at a party and they said, oh my God, you should buy this product. They didn't ask you any questions about yourself. They didn't know you were looking for that thing. You would probably be like, okay, that's nice. Thank you. Yeah. But let's say you had a few lunches and coffees after them and you started talking to them about like these other problems that you had. And then after a little bit of time, they were like, oh, you should really get this product. You're very likely to convince yourself that that's the best product. And that's the entire marketing and sales process at the end of the day is building that relationship at scale. So it's all a long game, but it all starts back at the relationship with the person. And I feel like as new as some of these tactics are in digital marketing, that principle is tale as old as time. So
I think that's so true. And we tend to forget that, right? We just focus on sort of the bright, shiny object of technology, and we forget that a relationship is a relationship, whether it is the old way, face-to-face, or whether it's through digital marketing or whatever. Ultimately, it's two human beings, right, making a connection. And what you're saying about that is, it's very true. We have to be reminded of it, even though when someone reminds us of it, we're like, yeah, okay, I get it. But you need to have it pointed out to you pretty frequently. Me too, right? It's the same thing. We forget about all of that. So, Madeline,
absolutely.
You've shared so many great things. How can people connect with you? Where can we find you?
So you can connect with me on LinkedIn if you would like. That's a great way to get in touch. You can also reach out to me directly at Madeline@Inqling.studio, INQLING.studio. That's my creative agency. So I'm always happy to have conversations with people. If you're facing a particular challenge and you want to have a chat, more than happy to be a sparring partner, especially if you're a solopreneur. I know how hard it is when you don't have tons of people that you can bounce ideas off of. So I'm always happy to be reached out to, but LinkedIn's always a safe bet.
Well, I'll make sure that all of these details are in the show notes so that people can find you. And I really want to thank you for sharing your time, for sharing your expertise. I always learn so much when we sit down.
Oh, it's been my absolute pleasure. And of course, if you've learned nothing else from our chat, it's that it all depends, right? It depends is the classic answer.
Oh, absolutely.
It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with industry leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and authors who share their expertise, experience, and insights about succeeding in business and in life. And make sure to visit Spin Expo. From trend information to technical innovation, Spin Expo is the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are bursting with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. You can also find the link in the show notes for this episode. And don't forget to check out our podcast website, where you can find all of the previous episodes of the Seat at the Table podcast, the show notes, news about our upcoming masterclass series, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.